Galana is a smecus, a very proud species that holds on to social standings above all else, and part of that is traditions. At its tradition, each of the children are allowed to spend time, 3 smecus years in total, exploring the universe. This is to open their minds to a universe that is very, very large, to experience other cultures and grow as an individual before entering their duties to the species, to the family, and to the culture at large. They can travel wherever they choose, with few exceptions. On this list is things like the ice world of Berea 4, due to its very inhospitable and unstable climate, just like the volcanic world of Rip 1. Almost all planets that are on the prohibited list are considered hell worlds, places that are not just excessively dangerous to travel, but basically suicide. Many have been lost seeking their grand adventure along these worlds, so anything with a high loss rate is turned into a prohibited world or sector. On this list is a planet with a very high population, a space-faring species that looks quite similar to her own. It's a climate that is consistently changing, offering a massive amount of experiences in just one place. The populace is considered primitive as they follow a very common law system, although it is noted that travel to and from this sector is performed by locals and locals alone due to the massive protective shield of this sector, commonly known as the Ord Cloud. Once inside, no other species can bother you as they can't scan through this cloud itself, and one is free to do whatever they desire once you can get there. Within reason, of course. What makes this planet and its associated sector prohibited is not the Oort cloud being dangerous to travel through, not the fact that this can be considered a death world if you wanted to, but it is the population. Somehow, even through all the dangers, they can convince even the most loyal of their species to remain in the Soul Sector, or return with ideas that change the status quo. One of, as what it seems to be, the most destructive to the Smec society is the insistence of treating males as equals, something that just blows their mind. To them, the idea of a dominant male is laughable and a bit scary, to be honest. This is never an issue before, primarily due to the fact that the Smex males are smaller and weaker than the females. Yet when males came back from Earth, they have become stronger, more confident, more bold. Yet the arrogance is something that can get a male sent in for corporal punishment. The amount of males that remain or return to Soul is dwarfed by the females that seem to never, ever want to leave. This actually almost caused a interspecies incident, yet it was discovered that the females were not imprisoned or coerced at all. The realization instantly placed Earth and Soul on the prohibited list for those that travel about as their own type of walkabout. Yet, the moment you tell a young member of any species they cannot do something, the urge to want to do that single action is beyond intense. Gilliana had to take a very obscure route and even wear a full biosuit to get through the security checks, pretending she was an Utarn. The Utarn are another species that looks similar to her, yet they had a strange green skin and horns. The biosuit is due to the high amount of irritants in the air for their species. They just can't deal being around with too many other species for too long without the irritation making them go completely nuts. The entire time during travel, she was nervous. Her biosuit holding in all the perspiration, which made the inside very uncomfortable to deal with. What made it worse was the waste collection system leaked just a little bit inside the suit. As she entered the final shuttle to Seoul, she thought to herself, this had better be worth it. Landing on the planet, she made her way to the first area and exchanged credits for local credit. To her surprise, the humans don't take credits. She had to barter with her suit, smell and all, for local currency. Concerned, but still interested about the planet she was on, she headed to a local business to consume some of their local cuisine. Yet as she walked, she stuck out with her blue skin that seemed to shimmer. Her very sparse and decorative clothing as well seemed to draw a lot of attention. But she didn't care. She wanted to consume something. The local break fast was delightful, but a bit heavier than she was used to. In fact, she almost didn't want to move. It did also cost more than she had originally thought, but she figured it would be much longer before she even consumed anything, perhaps several days. For now, she just intended to see the sights. Taking a trip around the city, eventually she wanted to see outside of the city. She wanted to see the human nature she had heard so much about. It was interesting, but she quickly found herself on the short end of her currency. Basically, she's broke. Entering a diner, she looked around and there was nobody there except the one behind the counter. She sat and asked the Urton that was working behind the counter if there was any way that she could secure more finances. The Urton looked up and down Galatea's skinny body before saying, "Maybe. Sit down and let me contact somebody." Galatea was able to enjoy a cup of the exciting liquid humans call coffee. When the waitress actually returned, she mentioned that as long as you don't mind working with your hands, one of the farms up the way could actually use you. You interested? Giving a look back to the waitress, spreading her arms wide and pointing to her disheveled body, she said, "Does it appear that I have a choice?" A minute later, even though she was just waiting, a plate of food was actually placed in front of her. Galatea was surprised and then said she didn't have the currency to pay, and then the waitress simply said, "Already been paid for." Galatea saw this, took a whiff, and then ate with gusto and finished as the doors opened and a very large human now sat next to her. Most of his large body is covered, to include his face with that scraggly beard, yet his hands are bare, and they showed the wear of somebody that worked all the times with their hands. A plate of some food was placed in front of him, and he began to eat. While they ate, he said, "You still interested in work? If so, follow me once we're done with breakfast." His gruff voice seemed direct, but oddly kind. They chat while they eat, and then he immediately paid the bill as soon as he was done, then got up and left, motioning for Galatea to follow her. Galliana runs outside behind him and has to climb up into a vehicle which she learned is called a pick-up truck, a rugged machine that is almost frightening to her with its size, not just from the clear amount of power that it seems to have when it moves, not just from the rumble of the noise whenever the accelerator is depressed, but the fact that such a massive machine could be handled with such ease, such grace. The only part she was not interested in, the fact that actually did annoy her the most, was the fact that the seat was just too large, even though she was, as she was told, buckled in. Arriving at the large ranch, Galliana was given a tour, informed of her duties that were almost primarily around the house. This upset her, of course, as such duties are meant to be relinquished to males. She voices her concern, and the man named Hank asks her if she would prefer something more physical. She agrees, and they head towards the barn where a few hay bales had actually rolled off the stack. Hank tells her to prove that she can do the physical work and to restack the bales. And Galatea tries to drag the bale at first, then rolls it up to the stack. After about 20 minutes, she finally succeeds at flipping it up and dragging it slowly, inch by inch, to the top. Standing proud, she breathes hard and says, "That wasn't so hard." Hank immediately replies, "That's one." Galliana looks down to the ground where there's 3 more and widens her eyes. She says to herself, "That's impossible." Right before Hank hurls one of the bales straight up towards her with such efficiency that she couldn't actually believe it. She leaned back and watched as all three bales end up landing one by one. Galliana tries to get out of the way as the hay bales land, only to have one more land right next to her. Before she realizes all three are actually next to her, and her leg is now down inside one of the small gaps between the hay bales, she realizes, oh, well, maybe not. Hank climbs up and then lifts her out of the hole she's in like a father lifting a child. Seeing all this, Galliana agrees to all the domestic duties. Over the next 6 months, she watches Hank awaken every morning, sometimes before the local star has even crested the horizon. He is constantly working in the heat of the sun, working on the massive amount of equipment that is either being run or being maintained, tending to the strange set of creatures that he calls cattle. She's absolutely amazed at his tenacity of all things, just never stopping. She was also amazed one day when a storm came in and Hank actually got to the door soaking wet. Before he came in, he peeled off all the layers of clothes before entering the house, wringing them out before throwing them in the dryer. When he walks through the door, Galliana cannot help but stare. She knows that current human tech allows them to regenerate and rejuvenate to their absolute physical peak. What she's actually looking at that amazed her so much is nearly a century of hard work and clean eating. As he stands there trying to get his clothes inside without actually tripping all over the floor, he looks at her simply standing there in one of his t-shirts, which was oversized for her petite body, which she prefers as she hates wearing all those additional clothing. As he stands there and sees her not blinking, he simply says, "What?" And then he headed off to the side to throw all his clothes in the washer and dryer. It was this day that they received the first visitor in a while. A tall, fit female ran straight towards the door from her vehicle, trying desperately not to get soaked from the utter downpour. When the door opened up, the human female stood at the door, stomping her feet down, seemingly trying to get some of the terra firma off of her shoes, and began shaking her clothes and complaining about the damn rain. When the large, fit human female saw Galliana, she paused for a second and then yelled, "Hank!" Hank walked back in, partially dressed and holding a towel. Handing it to the human woman, she began to dry herself as she began to strip off layers of her soaked clothing as well. Galliana quickly brought another towel and was amazed at the figure of this human female. She had already stripped off her outer layers, only having one or two pieces of clothing still on her. She looked amazed at this thing was tall, lean, muscular, and seemed like the ideal of one of her people's warriors. As Galliana gawked at her, the human female said, "So, you gonna introduce me?" Hank introduced his sister Jane to Galliana. Jane's handshake was a bit painful, as that huge paw seemed to squeeze the hand real tight. But it was expected from the warrior class, at least that what she was think. Turns out Jane was not a warrior, actually. She had her own farm in the next town over. She only visits when the weather is due to get really bad, claiming she is to check on her baby brother. Hank was not amused by her statements, but didn't put up much of a fight. They all talk over several cups of coffee and cake that was pulled out of the freezer. As the heavy rains fall outside, they enjoy each other's company, and Galatea was able to get out the series of unfortunate events that led her to this farm. Jane listened intently and seemed to be waiting for something. After a while, when Hank excused himself to go relieve himself, Jane only waited until Hank closed the door before she changed her tone. "What is your angle?" Jane asked. "Angle?" Galliana asked. Jane looked into the bright green eyes of Galliana and said, "Yes, your angle. Are you trying to seduce my brother or get something from him?" Galliana was actually put back by this statement, actually did back up a little bit with her face. She said, The only thing I want is enough currency to get back home before my time runs out. So, you're planning on leaving him? Jane asks. After Galliana nods, Jane says, Then you had better make it perfectly clear before you break that heart of his again. Again? Galliana looked completely confused. Yeah, again, Jane says. About a decade ago, another alien girl showed up with her friends. Hank began to treat them right, and he got feelings. And it looked like they might even get married at one point. They were getting so close. That is until she just up and left. Pretty sure he had already brought a ring or something, but I'm not sure about that one. Anyway, he closed himself off for a long time, a long, long time. So I'm going to tell you, if he opens his heart to you, you better crawl inside and make a nest. If not, it's not nice to talk about someone behind their back like that. Hank had actually walked into the room silently. His voice at that point, which is normally just stoic, is so cold that it seems as though the temperature of the room lowered by several degrees. The two women realized that they had been completely busted. The tension remains even as Jane heads back home. Galliana turned and tried to talk to Hank about his past. He deflected, of course, and went to sleep. Galliana wanted to keep talking about it in the morning, but it seemed like the next day, Hank could just continue as though nothing had happened the previous day. For over an additional year, Galliana worked on that farm. She learned every part of it, and the work actually made her stronger. Even though she couldn't throw the condensed dry foliage like Hank and Jane could, she could at least throw it a little bit, one at a time, with both hands. She could do this to the point of being able to raise this hay bale at least over her head in order to stack it. She also got to witness and participate in the duality of humans. She saw how strong and how direct they were, but also how soft and how kind. Watching how careful they are in the birth of a new animal on the farm, the care and tenderness of Hank as he cradled this new member of the farm. How he explained it is, in certain times, he and Jane would definitely take special care, but when times of strength were needed, they could immediately change. There was even a time when Hank stayed awake with a newly born animal that he called a colt, just to comfort it all night and be there when it died. Galliana actually went to check on them at first light of the day. She got there as Hank stood up, wiped a set of tears from his eyes, standing over the body, and he simply steeled himself and said, Maybe next year. Then, taking the body out and placing it inside the soil, once again with great care, even though he was using heavy machinery. Through it all, Galliana began to understand that those strong hands, those thick arms, the massive chest that all held something else in the humans, something that made her actually want to stay. Over time, as her interest grew, Galliana tried to interest Hank in a physical relationship. Hank just got quiet whenever this happened and went back to work. At one point, all she wore was one of Hank's shirts, purposely getting it wet, and was a bit upset, believing that she was not attractive enough. Jane arrived later that day and ended up put Galliana straight. She said, His heart has become hard. This is what humans do to protect themselves. Understand, the previous woman I talked about cut him deep, and it left scars. Galliana looked sideways at Hank off to the side, and then turned back to Jane before saying, I've never seen scars, and I've seen him without his clothing. Jane almost smirked at a time, but then got serious again, looked Galliana in the eyes, and said, Well, the scars you don't see are actually the deepest. Eventually, Galliana saved enough to get her ticket back home. She thanked the siblings profusely for their hospitality and aid. After leaving, She returned all the way to her homeworld and that castle of a home. For the entire trip, though, she barely spoke. Even when she returned, she was just not the same. Her sisters never pried into it, as Galliana was now incredibly fit by her species standards, and it seemed to frighten them. Besides, she had to mentally prepare herself for her marriage and her life of duty. As she was reading one day, one of her younger sisters arrived and said, "So, how was Earth?" Though Galliana denied actually going there, her sister actually came back with the flight logs showing that she had actually returned straight from Earth. She had taken a few detours, of course, but nothing that could be tracked fairly easy. Then she began hinting how she would inform Galliana's future spouse, but this did not worry Galliana. She just continued to deny that she had gone. That is when her little sister pulled a trump card and said, "All right then, perhaps I will just present this evidence to Mother." This got Galliana's attention as she jumped up and said, "Don't tell Mother I was on Earth." Her sister grinned surprisingly wide, saying, "I will not tell her, but only if you tell me what you experienced." After a moment to compile her words, Galliana said, "I was able to study human nature up close. It is difficult. It can break you if you're not ready. Over time, though, it makes you stronger." Her sister asked, "Did you meet any of those humans while you were there?" "Only the best," Galliana said. "And how was he?" she said, blushing and giggling at the same time. Galliana looked her square in the eye and said, "It's not like that. It was not like that. I, he, she, all I can say is that I want to go back. I can see why Earth is actually on the prohibitive list. They're wonderful." She gets back up on her feet. Before leaving, she says, "All right, I told you. Now remember, don't tell Mother I was on Earth." Hello, everybody. This is Syntax. Thank you for joining me today on this short story. Now, before I go, I gotta say today's winners are Erica Gem, with Julius Boone coming in a very close second. I also need to send out some great big thank yous to the supporters of this channel, and those will be Prozac and Pancakes, Sir, SS Demon, MTF Guard, Brian Kemp, Guardian Sage, Douglas Scarborough, and Erica Gem. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.